You're listening to CIA, Coffee, Intel, and Anxiety, a podcast from retired CIA officers Jeff and Pete. Drawing from decades in the intelligence world, they offer real stories, sharp analysis, and honest reflections on the pressure, decisions, and daily chaos that come with a life of secrets. Add coffee, a dry sense of humor, and a friendship forged under fire, and you've got a podcast like no other.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff. Welcome back to the podcast that we're trying to do to keep you both entertained, informed, and safe. Let me introduce you to Pete. Pete.
Hey, Jeff, how are you? We're brothers from another mother. We got a long history together. Little by little, we're going to we're going to reveal some things about us. So stay tuned. But one of the things that we thought was important in naming this podcast, we talked about a lot of different names, but we decided CIA, coffee, intelligence, anxiety, because we experienced all that and much more. And probably, one of the most important things that we needed, and I still need today, I need to have my coffee. You're all set there too, right? I don't know what people that don't drink caffeine or don't like coffee. I don't know how they survive because this saved me so many times. I think Jeff, for you, is the same thing. We did so much of our work in the evenings and the early morning hours, uh, easily into 11, midnight, 1 in the morning, or getting up super early, like 3 in the morning to go out and meet with sources, because those are the times of day that the sources were kind of available to get away from work or get away from their house and be able to meet with us. So it was usually a lot of late night activity and a lot of coffee. So I thank God for this beverage of the gods.
The other thing we had to do is, for me especially, would be I would meet late, but then I had to process everything I was given so that I could securely travel with it. And that's frequently where I was up until sometimes there was more than one occasion where I was literally up all night long, then had to go catch a flight that morning. So, yeah, God bless coffee.
Yeah, and it's the thing. People a lot of times ask about did we live overseas? Did we travel overseas? It was a combination of both. I mean, we lived overseas, but we also had to travel from wherever we lived. We also traveled to, regional countries. And so for us, travel, being, on the airplane, being in selecting and using hotels, we had a lot of experience in it and a lot of probably interesting stories to share. That's why in this podcast today, in this episode today, we wanted to have a continuation of the aspects of physical security when you travel and focus a little bit more on hotels, right?
Absolutely. And, keeping in mind what we were trying to do, we were also had to keep a low profile because we didn't want to stay at the big fancy schmancy hotels that had the doorman and everybody else keeping eyes on. We wanted to be a little bit more low profile than that. And
Mhm.
that usually worked to our advantage.
Mhm.
So you don't always have to stay in the 5 stars. 3 stars are pretty much what I tried to stay at, and those were usually pretty good for me. That worked out pretty well.
One thing that we have a lot of insight into is because, we work for an organization that also looks at targeting people, and we learned about what some of these other services, other countries try to do against us, right? And trying to collect information on us. So, one of the things that we're very sensitized to is the fact that in many countries, especially if we're talking about China, Russia, some of the big ones, right, that are adversaries, they will establish relationships with some of the major hotels in the country, especially the hotels where they know that U.S. citizens, especially business people, high profile, right? Could be U.S. citizens, could be U.S. diplomats. They're coming into country, and what are the hotels they tend to go to? And a lot of people have this habit of kind of like going to the same hotel because maybe they get rewarded points. So these kind of, even though these are American chains, it doesn't mean anything. They can still be exploited by the service. And so what does that mean? Basically, they will pre-wire a number of the hotel rooms there. So the people maybe at the reception, they'll have indication about what individuals to place in these rooms, what might be the targeted individuals. Once again, whether they're diplomats or U.S. business people, because they would like to collect on you on these targets while they're in those rooms. So, you have to be sensitized to, hey, everything in your hotel room, if they're targeting you, could be targeted, could be recorded. Every single conversation you have. I mean, there could even be video cameras in there. Not, we don't want to scare anybody, but I mean, this is the reality. If the local service, law enforcement of that country wants to know about specific individuals, the hotel room is a great place to collect on them. So one of the things that we would do is Jeff, explains, trying to avoid those types of hotels where we might think that we might know that they actually have targeting operations. Or in addition to that, we might try to throw them off because they're not going to have every single hotel room wired, but they'll maybe have a handful of them, and we're gonna throw them off. We'll try to throw them off if they give us the room number, whatever. On this, say your room number is 702, and we say, oh no, I can't be. That's too high of a floor. Don't you have anything on the third floor or on the second floor? I would really appreciate it. So you try to throw them off from directly assigning a hotel room to you. I know I did that quite a bit. You just want to take away that control that they might have in assigning you a room, or if you take a taxi or a transport, you want to try to control where that car is going, the route it's taking, and try to take as much control as possible to avoid being set up by not only local service, it can also be criminal groups in some of these places, right? That you have to be concerned about.
All right, Pete, you're getting way too serious, so we're gonna we're gonna put in a funny story.
Okay, I'm all game. I'll take some
My
coffee.
first trip to Damascus, back in the era of Hafez al-Assad. He was not a nice person. He was not an ally. He was kind of a brutal dictator, but in his defense, let me say very quickly, he protected religious minorities. Let's just leave it at that. However, as far as you and I were concerned, he was a bad guy, and his country was very hostile to our intentions. So on my first trip there, I stayed at the Sheraton Hotel because, I didn't know anything about it. I'm booking hotels. You go with what you know.
Yeah.
So I had a room at the Sheraton. The flight to get me there was I think an O dark 30, very early in the morning flight, and then a taxi from the airport, which is way far out of town, all the way into town. So by the time I got there and got checked in, I was exhausted. I was dirty. It was hot. So I got checked into the room, no problem. And I go up there. The first thing I want to do is take a shower. And so I jump in the shower and I'm all lathered up, soap in the eyes. The lights go off in the bathroom. Of course, what goes through my mind is like, they're coming through the door while I'm buck naked with soap in my eyes.
I don't want to envision that.
Try not to, Pete. Um, but you get the message. It's like,
Yeah,
what are we gonna do now? They're gonna
right.
take me in buck naked with soap in my eyes? Come on, let me at least get on pants. Well, then the light came back on and sanity returned. And you kind of got to relax. But those are some of the moments, the adrenaline charged moments that you and I have both had throughout all the years. And it's the stories. I mean, that happened, boy, I'm not going to tell you how many years ago that was, but I remember it very, very well.
Mhm.
The other
We,
the other point I want to make is that you said countries that are our adversaries. You mentioned China and Russia and a couple others. I'm going to posit that every country out there is our adversary except for the Five Eyes. The United States, Canada, England, UK, no, can't, what did I, US, Canada, UK,
Australia.
Australia, and New Zealand. Those are not our adversaries. We've been that way since the end of World War II.
Mhm.
Everybody else functionally is our adversaries. That doesn't mean they're our enemies. Let's not confuse those two terms. The French are very much our allies, but they put their priorities ahead of ours. I know you find that hard to believe. The Germans are the same way. So are the Spanish and whomever. They put their priorities first. So it's not that they're our enemies, but we're not always on the same side of the negotiating table.
No, we're not. And I
That's
think it's
why guys like you and I had a job to do in those countries as well so we could provide our policymakers and our leaders with the kind of information that they needed. And that required us staying in some entertaining hotels to get back to the topic.
Yeah, one thing that popped in my mind right now is that, so often, most of the time I was, checking in to hotels in alias, especially if I was meeting with sources. I mean, one thing is just traveling to a country where you're going to have, meetings with somebody or whatever, to try to develop them or establish contact. You might be using your true name, but when you're dealing with established sources, I mean, you're almost always checking in and out of these hotels in alias. And sometimes we get, I mean, so tired. I still remember coming in to check in, and I started to sign my real name. And right away, I fortunately I caught myself, and right away I kind of like did a big scribble to kind of like scribble it out, but it was like it's so easy. It's so easy to have these faux pas, when we're doing so many things and we get so stressed out and anxious, right? We're a little low on sleep, and it's a pretty big deal if you were to sign your name in another name that you're registered in, because everyone's going to say that, and you're going to say, "Why did he do that? It's strange." Or maybe they won't even say something to you. Maybe they'll report it to up there, the management, say that something is different about this person. Where they sign with a different name. So we always got to be on our toes. When
That's the bottom line. We always had to be on our toes. I was fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective. Most of the places I traveled to, I was in true name because of the nature of my cover.
Mhm,
So I was always in true name when I was traveling, especially when I was traveling around the Middle East.
mhm,
So that part I didn't have to contend with. But then again, there's downsides to being in your true name as well. There's other stuff that you might have to contend with. So
yeah.
yeah, it's
I,
always tough. It's always tricky with hotels. I did all my meetings in hotels. And another funny story, the very first meeting I had, my first operational hotel meeting of my career was at a hotel. Let's just say it's in Asia. And typically what we had done, or what we'd already organized was he was going to get the hotel room, and then we would be in the lobby at say 7:30 at night. Okay, no problem. And so once we saw each other, one of us would go to the bathroom and the other would follow a couple minutes later. And in the bathroom, we'd say, room 732. Okay, and then the other person would leave. And eventually,
mhm,
I would go upstairs to room 732.
mhm, mhm.
So, okay, no problem. All slicker and deer guts on a doorknob. That happens. I go back out, sit in the lobby for, 5 minutes. And then guess who shows back up in the lobby? It was the person I was meeting. And it's like, what? So once again, I had to go to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, he goes, I broke the key off in the door.
Oh no.
This guy was such a dope. I'm not going to tell you how that whole operation, yeah, that guy was such a dope. I was so glad when I could terminate him anyway. Um, but yeah, what do you do? I mean, it's those kinds of things, and you've experienced them. Every case officer out there experiences them. It's the oh my God, what do I do now moment, and that's
Yeah.
what we have to be prepared to do. And it's also, I got to say, why we love the job. I mean, if you can't deal with that adrenaline rush and 80% information, we've talked about it before, you're probably in the wrong field.
Yeah, and in future episodes, we're going to also be speaking a little bit about that, the contingency planning. We call it what if, what if this happens or that happens, because we call it Murphy's Law. If Murphy's out there, if it can go wrong, it will. And that's so very true. And we have to always be able to strategize this stuff through, that we can't wait until something happens and it's the first time we've ever encountered that or thought about it. Then we might make we might make the wrong decision. So it's so important.
Yeah, that was one of the best training experiences that we had and that you and I did as trainers was to have the officer go through the what ifs. And you got that four-panel quadrant going on with this, and this. And then how do you deal with it? What if you have a flat tire?
Hmm.
What if your guy doesn't show up?
Yep.
I mean, there's all the list of what ifs is very long. And chances of one of the what ifs that we talk about happening are not quite zero, but really very low. But there are other what ifs that we don't talk about that happen because we can't imagine them. Who would have imagined that this would happen?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but that gives
Uh,
us some way to react because we've thought about all these other what ifs. And so we have a plan, emergency plan in our head. Okay, I don't have a flat tire, but there's an accident ahead of me and it looks like I'm going to be late. Do we have a plan in place for that? Well, we didn't what if that,
yeah,
but we did what if I have a flat tire or something similar? And so that lets us continue to proceed.
yeah,
And that has to apply in business, especially if you're traveling and doing all kinds of stuff like that as well.
yeah. Well, let's move on to we want to talk about a little bit more about the hotel situation. So selection of hotel, what can happen, maybe not even related to the whole service looking at us, but other things, other considerations for security.
Yeah, most hotels and places where you and I visited had a person from the internal service, and what the internal service is similar to what would be our FBI, the
Mhm,
folks that are looking for spies like us, so to speak.
mhm,
So most countries' internal services have someone posted up in those hotels, and they basically sit in the lobby and they're just looking. They're not focused on anybody, they're just looking. And so maybe they see this American businessman. Maybe they don't get a lot of American businessmen in those hotels, but they see this American guy come down. He's meeting with the local, and then they leave and go have dinner. Okay, well, he makes a note. And maybe this happens, every third Thursday of the month. And then they start to see a pattern. And I know that from the work that you and I have done on our own counterintelligence, it's when you see those patterns
yeah.
that people start to say, maybe there's something more here than just a random friendship. The other one that I had to deal with was getting my guy up to my hotel room. So why are two men meeting in a hotel room? You know, and we have our clothes on. One of the things that I ended up doing was I would always buy two or three technology books because I was in the technology sector. So I would give him those books whenever we met. And that was always the reason we were meeting. Well, he's a friend of mine. I know him from the work I'm doing. And I brought him a couple books on whatever the technology was we were talking about. And that provided some justification. So he could leave and he would be carrying the books when he left so that again people would see, oh, it looks like he got. That's kind of how I played the game.
Mhm. As Jeff is alluding to, this kind of a term that we use within our industry is called, our cover. What's the cover for us being with somebody, a cover story? So because you can't say, what were you doing with that person? Oh, I'm a CIA and this person is just giving me secrets. You can't do that. You got you can never do that, even if they arrest you. You just can never admit to having committed espionage. So you need to have some kind of cover story, and we'll give you examples of that. But I'm interested in you. You had some anecdotes about I think where were you? Where there's a big terrorist uh, uh, attack against the hotel?
Oh, that was in Mumbai. And I don't know if you remember, I think 6 or 7 years ago
Hmm.
was when I think, excuse me, 10 terrorists came on shore from a Pakistani terrorist group. They split up into teams of two.
Oh,
And
there's a movie. There's a movie, Mumbai movie. It's a fantastic movie.
yeah, it's based on a true story. Um, so they came and they hit the two big hotels that were right there. The name of those hotels escape me right now, but I'm sure you can look them up. And they killed many people. They walked the halls. They went into a restaurant right next door to the hotel. It was frequented. That catered to hotel guests who were typically foreigners. And they also, I believe, attacked a Jewish house of some sort. I don't remember what it was. A house for elderly people, I think. So they attacked them, and it was brutal. The Indian government response was pathetic, to be kind. It took them literally 72 hours to get these guys cleaned out. And I like that. And actually, we had FBI guys on the ground before they managed to get them cleaned out. That tells you how long it took. So I could you imagine, pick a city you and I both know, Miami. Could you imagine a terrorist attack on a big hotel in Miami going on for 72 hours? Where
No.
they're killed, not that the negotiations don't go on, but where they're killing people for 72 hours.
No, if you haven't seen the movie, I really recommend it because it's real. That is real, real incident, and just imagine yourself being in that situation. It's really impactful.
It
But
took them
this
72 hours to get the SWAT team in there to go in and take them out.
Mhm. Well, so that for that reason, I mean, not that these attacks happen frequently, but they do, and they can happen, and so you have to be really careful. Think about what hotels might you stay at. You know, are you going to stay at one that's really high profile? And we know that these things can happen. I mean, unfortunately, it's not only in, this happens in the Middle East. I mean, this can happen in Europe. It can happen in the United States. These things can happen, not to scare people, but I mean, we have to be thinking about, are we staying at a place that could be a target? Are we going to an event where there's going to be a lot of people at that event where, that could be a target of someone trying to, to drive their car through the crowds? I mean, these days we just have to be more cognizant of how can we better maybe protect ourselves by not being in a place that could be a target by terrorists.
And good security practice means not only are you careful when you select a hotel, and we can't always predict where it's going to happen. I mean, if we could, we'd be very rich men. But when you go to your room, how do you secure your room? When you go to your room, put all the chains on, put all the little bars over, however they have it set up, and do the extra lock, put all the extra locks in place. Some people also take other locks with them that they can put on those doors. And if that's what it takes to make you feel comfortable, then you go for it. But at the very minimum, you should be taking advantage of all the locks that are already preset on those doors.
And give some thought to what do you have with you that's of value? Of course, cash, of course, your passport, of course, maybe your wallet or purse that has additional credit cards. Um, if you have a laptop or something like that. And do you put that in the hotel room safe? Do you leave it laying out? Probably laying out in the middle of the room is not a good idea because the chambermaids, not some of these hotels screen their people, but a lot of times people that are working for the hotels that get involved in the housekeeping are not that well paid. So if you leave something out, they could be very tempted to pick it up. So does it mean that your safe in the room is absolutely secure? No. I mean, you gotta take for granted that. I mean, I've seen this many times. I know Jeff, you must have seen this, and maybe some of the listeners as well. For some reason, you forgot the code, and you call housekeeping more. Come up. Can you please open it? And they got like a little card to this. Yeah, they open it up in a heartbeat. Do you think how easy it is for someone else to have, people that have access to that, whether that person at the hotel's on the take or someone else, can easily have that kind of tool to open it up. So if they really want to get into your safe in your room, they can. I mean, it's simple as that. It's probably safer, once again, safer than leaving something out in the room, but it's not absolute. Not absolute.
And this goes to be very prudent in the decisions you make about what you carry. Do you
Hmm.
need to be carrying $5,000 in cash or what have you? And I know you and I have carried large amounts of cash in our careers. Uh,
Yeah, that's when we get our adrenaline rush, right?
absolutely.
Thousands and thousands of bucks. I
Yep.
mean,
Yep. So we have to be careful and thoughtful, not for the cash for what you and I were doing, but why do you have these documents with you that can be stolen?
hmm.
Why are you carrying them into the country at all? And maybe you have good reason for it, and that's fine. I'm just suggesting that you go through the thoughtful process of saying, I need this, I don't need this. What do you have in your wallet that you're going to be traveling with that you don't need? Nobody cares about my NRA card when I'm traveling to wherever. In fact, that might work against me in some situations. So take a look through your wallet, what do you have that you really need? And make sure you only carry what you need, because that way, number one, if something happens and it is stolen, you have less loss. But number two, they're going to look and go, okay, there's nothing of value in here.
Mhm. Yeah, good points. And I would add that as much as possible, whatever you're carrying with you, especially if it's documents or money, have it on your body. Don't have like your separate, if women a purse or have if you're carrying a briefcase or a backpack, don't think it's secure there. The safest place is going to be on your body, you know. And you can even procure, you can buy these like what do you call them? These belts that have concealed
Money belts.
yeah. So they have these things, and whether it's in your belt or it's one of these things you hang over your neck underneath your shirt or blouse. Those things are all, I would highly recommend thinking about using those.
And you can buy a jacket. That's one of the things that I ended up buying when I was traveling in the Middle East was a travel sport coat. So I'd be wearing a sport coat, but it had like 17 pockets on it, all of them zippered and half of them concealed. So to get to that pocket, you had to go inside the inner pocket and then pop open the seal to get to what was in there. So, and even the shirt I have on now, not that I planned for it, but I've got the Velcro here that I wear this shirt when I travel because I put my passport in here. And then that way I always have it on me. And God forbid you got to evacuate the airplane, but I don't want to be rummaging around looking for my passport when I've evacuated the airplane. I want it on my person. So
Mhm.
think about what you're wearing when you travel, and what you're taking with you, as Pete correctly stated.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many things, and we talked a little bit about scams last time. Have you seen the movie Focus? I
No,
think it's with Will Smith.
I'll look it
And
up.
uh, but it focuses on focuses on they're basically scammers, or they lift things from you, right? But part of it always starts out with some misdirection, try to get your attention focused on something else. And I think think about that as also being one of these things you want to be very, very careful with. If someone's approaching you or something happens, that might serve to distract you while they might be pickpocketing you or doing something else. So you always have to be a little bit on your guard. And Jeff and I have come across a lot of people, whether they're working for the security service or criminal groups, that they might approach you and they will have impeccable English. They speak so well. I mean, much better than you would ever find somebody else in that country that maybe has good English, right? But they speak very, very well. And they try to build your confidence, trust in them, and you start and then maybe they'll invite you to go somewhere for drinks, or maybe they'll offer to take you somewhere the following day to maybe purchase something. And you always got to be a little bit leery of these people. Just don't take for granted, because they're so friendly and they're so kind and they know so much about America. They love they love Americans, they love to speak English. You got to be always a little bit on your guard and not just take for trusting of everybody, because there's a lot of these scams that start out that way.
Yes, sir. You are absolutely correct. It's always about being on your guard, whether you're walking around Orlando or Tampa or New Delhi or Damascus or Sana'a. You always have to be on your guard. And that's
Mhm.
just the nature of the world we live in. And that's not to criticize any of those locations. It's human nature. It's what humans have been doing to each other since pretty much the beginning of time.
Mhm.
So we have to be on our guard.
So what do you recommend, Jeff, as far as when you're on the street and we talk about security? I mean, if you're walking, I would always recommend that if you have to carry a backpack or something or a briefcase, I think you want to have it on the opposite side of your body. You don't want to not walk close to the curb, because walking close to the curb, anybody can come around, like even with a motorcycle, and be able to lift something off you. I would say you want to stay as far away from the curb as possible, and maybe closer to the wall of the building. Um, you want to also think about, well, maybe there's times when you shouldn't really be on the street at all. Try to take, transport, and there's a lot of different types of transportation uh, that's available in some of these large cities, but at the same time, if you are in India and you're taking some of these, what do they call these really these little combos,
Little three-wheelers, tuk-tuk.
yeah, I mean, or those, or I mean, there's even these other ones that have like they're little vans that will take people.
Right.
If if that is not a mechanism that's used by a lot of expats or foreigners, you're going to stand out. You're going to stand out. You want to maintain, you want to lower your profile too, and not just stand out where you become an easy target for people. I think a lot of times, people like to hail random, call them random taxis. It's like, hey, there's a taxi there, but you got to be so careful. And I would recommend not doing that for a few reasons. First of all, I had a lot of experience in Brazil, I mean, in Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. In the case of Mexico, approximately 40 to 50% of the taxi drivers are illegal. I mean, they will just, they'll paint like the license number of their cab on the vehicle, so they look pretty legitimate. Only the other taxi drivers and maybe sometimes the police might be able to determine, hey, that's not, that's not an authentic one, but doesn't mean that they're bad. Doesn't mean that they're trying to mug you, but they're trying to make a living. So you really want to get away from taking those types of vehicles because every so often there are ones that will pick you up and they will take you. You go around the corner and all of a sudden two other gentlemen will get in the car, one on each side of you, and they'll take you to every single ATM until they emptied your ATM, or worse. Um, so you really want to be careful. We had actually an officer that was working for me. I won't say where this happened, but he finished he was doing everything by the letter of the law when it came to his operation. He got back to the hotel and he was going to go out for a night, nightlife. He changed, he come down and he hailed a random taxi. He just told the taxi driver where he wanted to go. And so the taxi driver just started taking off and he was going increasingly faster. And he seemed like he was going in a direction away from where this officer, he kind of knew his way around a little bit. He was going in the wrong direction. And the officer was telling him, the case officer was telling him, hey, where are you going? And the guy wouldn't respond. And then he would say, stop the car. And the guy wouldn't respond. So all of a sudden, he leaned over, the seats and he put the guy in the headlock. He put the taxi driver in a headlock so he couldn't breathe. And then finally he stopped the car and he got out of it. I mean, who knows what he was going to do, where he was going to take this people, take this officer. But I mean, you got to be so careful. You pretty much want to take vetted taxis, maybe at an official taxi stand, or have somebody call call them radio taxis, because uh, so many bad things can go wrong if you are not if you're not using legitimate taxis.
That's absolutely correct. And the other thing that you do, that's kind of the dark side. Let's look on the positive side. If you work through legitimate organizations, whether it's the hotel you're staying at, get a hotel car. They are most likely, nothing's 100%, most likely going to be legitimate. They're going to pick you up on time. They're going to wait for you and they're going to bring you back. They're not going to try and cause those kinds of problems. Alternatively, depending on where you're going, I'll give you a perfect example. My sister came to visit when I lived in Uganda, and she wanted to go to one of the game preserves. And so I contacted a local travel agent that I knew and said, hey, my sister wants to go visit this game preserve down in the southern part of the country. And she's like, okay, I'll set it up. And it was not inexpensive, that much I can assure you. But the gentleman picked her up in a minivan and drove her. She was the only one in the van. It was just her. Drove her all the way south. They stopped for lunch and things like that. He was a friendly guy. She stayed, I think, 2 nights on the game preserve. Got to see a hyena. I have a picture someplace of a python wrapped around a little gazelle. So, I mean, she was going to some real places. And then she got in the van and the guy brought her back home. But it was all very organized. It wasn't random. It wasn't, as you said, the random taxi on the street. And yes, it was expensive. I think that trip cost her a little over $1,000. But what's your safety worth? You
Oh
want to do
yeah,
it,
this is
you want to do
huge.
it the cheap way. You're also going to do it the less safe way.
Mhm.
And for everybody's safety, you got to spend a little bit extra money to make
Yeah.
sure you're doing it safely.
I remember, I think I put this in my, yeah, I put this in my book as well. There's a case of a couple that traveled to Cancun. A lot of people, a lot of Americans travel to Cancun, and you can have a great time there, but you also have to be careful. And in the travel advisories, both put out by the U.S. State Department as well as in some of these travel books, they say, do not take, a random taxi. Just don't hail a taxi, off the street. Go to a stand or call a taxi. And it so happened that this couple had finished their vacation. They were at the international airport, ready to take their flight back to Miami, I believe. And the husband already said, "Oh man, I need a pack of cigarettes." And he decided, he wanted to do it quickly, so he just hailed a taxi. And he told the taxi, I need some cigarettes. And the taxi took him to, like, it looked like this convenience store, but when they got there, it was closed. And then and the guy is asking, well, where else can we go? And then the taxi driver continued a little bit further. And as soon as they got there, he got out of the car to go into the store, and he was apprehended by four people, apparently they've been working with the taxi, already. It was this gang. They beat the crap out of him. They robbed him, and even worse, they left him for dead. They actually hacked him up with a machete, and they left him in a ditch. And miraculously, he found his way back. I mean, he basically dragged himself back to a main road, and was able to get to a hospital. But he had a number of reconstructed surgeries after that. I mean, this is just not to scare you, but I mean, these things really do happen, and you really should follow the advice that are in these travel guides, because, once again, it's not the same as being in the United States when you're going to some of these locations overseas.
You got that right, Pete. So with that, I want to encourage everybody to be safe, be secure, be smart. If you have any questions about where you're traveling to, contact me, contact Pete. You can see our contact information below. Just reach out to us. I've got a lot of experience in Africa and the Middle East and some in Asia. Pete's got Europe and Latin America all sewed up. So again, you need any kind of guidance like that, reach out to us. We're not going to charge you anything. We're going to try and give you good advice because we want a good, strong, large audience.
We do, and if you get a chance to recommend this podcast to others, please continue to watch. I think we're going to be speaking about a lot of different topics. And speaking of that, our next in 2 weeks, it's going to be
June 2nd.
June the 2nd. Absolutely, and we're going to talk a little bit more about travel, but we're going to talk about how to protect your information, your sensitive information, your personal information, or if you're traveling for business, how to protect your information of your company, et cetera, against those people that might try to steal it from you.
We're talking about digital information. How do you keep your phone secure? How do you keep your computer secure? How do you keep your iPad secure? All that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. All right. So until next time, good coffee. Right?
Absolutely.